thank you for joining us, and welcome to our seminar, the Samueli Initiative Seminar on Responsible AI in Medicine. I'm Owen Asman, and I will moderate today's event. And some of you have already been to our previous meetings. So I'll just briefly share with you that we started this seminar last year. You can find the previous meetings online. So we have partnered with the Bioethics Center at our Faculty of Medicine, and so you can find the meetings again from different speakers from different countries and continents, presenting different aspects of the interaction of, let's say, health and ethics and responsible AI. So that was last year, and this year, this is our second meeting of the English seminar. We had one in Hebrew also in regards to, let's say, responsible AI during a time of war and how such medical implications could be relevant in such times. I'm just mentioning again, we are very interdisciplinary in our approach, and so we're very happy to have members and people joining us from different disciplines, different stakeholders, and different countries. And with that, I would like to present today's speaker. So I don't think we need my presentation anymore. And let me just maybe say a few words. So it was really a pleasure for us to meet you, Professor Effy Vayena. I'm going to share a bit about Professor Vayena's background and let her take the stage and the lead. So Professor Effy Vayena is a professor of bioethics at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, and Associate Vice President for Digital Transformation and Governance. In her research, she has tackled ethical questions that relate to the cutting edge of biotech research in areas such as genomic technologies, big data analytics, and AI for healthcare. And if you check just some of her publications, you'll see a very prolific writer, and I'm really waiting to hear what you have to share with us. Vayena is elected member of the Swiss Academy of Medical Sciences, a member of the World Economic Forum's advisory board for the Global Risks Report. She co-chaired the WHO's expert advisory group on artificial intelligence, health ethics, and governance. Professor Vayena is a renowned expert and frequently advises governments and public policy organizations on matters of digitalization, AI, and ethics. And today's talk is going to focus on ethical medical AI innovation from theory to practice, and drawing on original research. Professor Vayena will propose ways in which we can facilitate the translation to practice of ethical medical innovation, while highlighting the role of institutions in the next phase of the ethics of medical AI. And as always, we will have enough time for discussion, debate, Q&A. So the floor is yours, and we're looking forward.
Well, thank you very much, Oren. Thank you so much for first of all, for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to follow from some really amazing colleagues and speakers that you had in your program last year. So it's a pleasure, and of course, I do hope that we'll be able to have these activities in person soon and in a different climate of peace. But my thoughts have been with you all, and they're still with you in these times. So I will just start by sharing my slides, and then and then the discussion will go without slides. So it'll be more fun to see each other. But let's start here with this share and. Okay, can you see the slides? And just let me, if they don't move, please let me know. Sometimes they get stuck. So what I wanted to, I want to speak about how we are moving, or how we could possibly move from theory about doing things right to practice. And I have a couple of caveats for this presentation. One is that I am going to use digital health innovation, medical AI innovation, and health AI innovation interchangeably, although I understand that for many people, and it should, there are many distinctions to be made. But for the purposes of this conversation, I think it's okay to accept the use in that way. I'm also going to say that I am going to use, and I'll explain why, ethical AI, trustworthy AI, responsible AI, and AI for good, if it pops up, also interchangeably, although I think there are serious distinctions that have to be made. And not just because we should be pedantic, but also because there are some serious distinctions to be made here. But the reason I'm not going to be making is because I use resources and scholars and academic work that has used these terms almost interchangeably. So I apologize for this. I'm aware of the fact that there are serious distinctions here, but for the purpose, again, of this presentation, allow me to use them interchangeably. And the last caveat is that I am going to rely for some of what I will tell you on research we did here in Switzerland, as you mentioned earlier. I don't think, and it will be clear where that is, although I have the impression that our findings are not just specific to Switzerland. I think they have more of a kind of global or universal applicability, at least in countries that are fairly similar to Switzerland in many ways. So with these caveats in mind, what I will do is I'll say a little bit about the AI ethics in medicine and healthcare care, and then turn towards the obstacles for ethical innovation, which essentially it's about the obstacles for moving from this alleged theory, established theory, to practice, and then finally to some of the solutions that we draw from that research I mentioned in Switzerland. So just a very quick recap is that, as you all in this group are aware of, there is some very serious work going on about AI ethics in general. It is, though, work in progress, although we have been doing that work, there's still unclarity and there's still controversy, and we're still cannot say with certainty that we got to our objective, which is to have ethical AI. So in that respect, a lot has been done, but work in progress. And a lot has been done also looking at AI ethics from a variety of approaches, from the human rights approach, from principles approach, from moving on to ethics-based design, from tools. So there's a lot of activity around the world. I won't go through that. Another very quick slide to show that as far as guidelines are concerned, we've seen all kinds of organizations producing them, starting maybe from 2016, 17. We still see organizations coming out with ethics guidelines in general for AI, but of course, several of those pertain to uses of AI in the space of health and medicine. What we have seen also in the meantime is something different, which is some sort of critique to AI ethics, again, generally speaking, but of course it does apply to what we're doing in health and medicine. And in a sense in which the idea or the concept of ethics seems to be seen as something very different from what happens in practice. So I do use this quote from Gina Neff, from 2021, it's not long ago, which is where she states that we start talking less about AI ethics in these days, but we're actually what we do in our actual work. So we're getting in everyday life, so it's getting more practical. Now, it's interesting to think that AI ethics is so far away from what we're doing in practical. So in something practical that we have to leave the ethics talk and move on to practice. But again, we can pick this up more in discussion. I just want you to have it in mind. We've also seen papers like this about the uselessness of AI ethics. And this is not, I think, well, of course, it's a provocative title here in this paper, but I think it reflects this sense that Gina was kind of trying to capture in her quote, that a lot of the AI ethics, so far at least, was a lot of talk, a lot of theory, and it ignored the actual practice, also some of the real problems that we see when we are in practice. And I think what happened in that time is, of course, everything moves fast. I think those of us who come from bioethics, we saw that some of these conversations, similar conversations, took a lot longer to mature and advance in bioethics over the years. But here the pace is different, not only in technology, but also in our thinking, in the way we're thinking about ethics, about guidance, and about its application. Coming to medicine and health, so that's the general thing, and I think it's useful to have in mind. Although AI in healthcare and medicine has its differences and distinctions, in general, I think it gets informed by what's happening in the broader space of AI and AI ethics. And so moving to AI ethics in medicine and healthcare, we are also here talking about something that I took from a paper that Zach Kohane published very recently, and as an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine, about the race to frame the race to frame AI in healthcare as referring clearly to the kind of policies that should be informed by ethics in order for AI in healthcare to be ethical, to be to meeting the ethical standards that we set. So we're seeing from this general description and the general discourse about how AI ethics should be, whether it stays in theory, whether it moves into practice, and what kind of practice, we start seeing this conversation getting more specific in the space of health and medicine. And oops, here, sorry, there we go. And of course, this is what's the work of WHO is emblematic here. I know Andreas Reis will be speaking, or have spoken to you, or will speak to you again. But this is work that the World Health Organization did already since 2021 in trying again to bring these issues of AI ethics into the specific domain of health, healthcare, medicine, and global health, public health, and global health. The first one in 2021, the Ethics and Governance of Artificial Intelligence for Health. The last one being the document, the guidance that came out in January, specifically on large multimodal models in the space of healthcare. So this is what's happening, and I think these are the major initiatives in the space of health and medicine. And of course, I'm just putting out to remind you up here on the slide to remind you the principles that these documents rely on. Not unknown principles to those of us that have worked in bioethics and in healthcare. But again, they do take, in the context of these reports, a very specific articulation in the context of the risks and benefits of artificial intelligence. These particular reports also include some tools, and I'll come to the tools a little later. Now, what is the real issue? It seems that, as in general AI ethics, also in health AI ethics, we are pretty good at when it comes to principles and guidelines. Except from the WHO documents, I think there is also a plethora of other documents that one could use to address some of the challenges that we see that in terms of risks in AI in health and healthcare. At the same time, we do have the overall sense that we're still not ready to say that we do have out there digital health technology that meets or our ethical criteria, or that we call it responsible digital health technology, again, enabled by artificial intelligence. And in fact, there is probably a general feeling that the practice we could actually do a lot more to move from the principles and from the theoretical work that has been done to through practices to the real outcomes that we would like to see. But most people feel that we do have a gap. Now, you could say, well, that doesn't mean that any digital technology that is out there enabled by AI have some ethical problem. And I would never argue that. But I think what I'm referring to is the easiness with which we could say that our theoretical frameworks about what AI, ethical medical AI is, are translated into actual practice. So in order to address this type of question, of course, we look at the literature, but what we did here in Switzerland was to do a study and investigate stakeholders, various types of stakeholders to understand why they think that it's not so easy to go from this theoretical understanding of what ethical AI-enabled digital health technology is to actual products that they meet all these criteria. And we did that in the context of a bigger research project that we had here in Switzerland, trying to understand if there are things that can be changed so we can't get there, or if we're just, that's the way things are and we cannot do anything about it. So we were doing this research with the general objective to identify eventually some solutions. But we started from trying to understand what are the obstacles. So this type of research was not really about developing more theory about what AI ethics in healthcare is. It was, and conceptualizing this, it was rather looking at where it was rather in the translational pathway and understand why even the things we have agreed upon and we kind of think that they're the right way to do things are not easy to do or are not really happening. So that's in the sort of like trajectory, if you wish, that's where our research was focused. So we did have different types of stakeholders, including startups and doctors, hospital administrators, all kinds of people that you can imagine are involved in this kind of ecosystem. And we did developed a methodology. The paper is published. You can see all of that. I'm happy to share I think I did share the link with this paper. But what we did, what I want to do today is discuss some of the results of this work. And so in terms of at least this particular stakeholder group, and I'll say later why I think that's not a very specific thing to Switzerland, but rather more of a phenomenon that I think is true, holds true for other countries as well. We have three kind of clusters of issues that block, let's say, the translation of like ethical theory to actual practice. The first cluster was about something that we call ineffective stakeholder collaboration. The second was lack of ethical awareness amongst digital health innovators. Now you'll be surprised if you are in the groups of people who think, well, we have so many papers about ethical AI, we have so many papers and so much work and so many guidelines about this, so why are they unaware? So I'll get into that. And then at least in our context, and here it's possible that doesn't hold true in many other contexts, lack of relevant regulation. Now, I don't know, in Israel, I think you might be probably more advanced in that respect. You've been dealing with these issues a little longer. Switzerland has a more conservative take on certain things, so maybe we are not as far ahead. But I think, again, when we're thinking about regulation, again, this could hold true to several countries. So let's look at those specific clusters. What was the ineffective stakeholder collaboration that we identified? You'll see on the right side, in the sort of more transparent font, there's some actual quotes from the people that we interviewed in the process of this study, and how they identify when it says cantonal hospital. It's the way we do the administrative, the way we are dividing ourselves in Switzerland is in cantons. And a cantonal hospital is a major hospital in a region that covers many patients, large numbers of patients. So in the ineffective stakeholder collaboration, the things that we were able to tease out was we have an issue with standards and definitions, like the idea of the common language that would allow collaboration between stakeholders. We also identified that core stakeholders lack incentives to jointly pursue digital health innovation. And here, different kinds of things, incentives being pulling stakeholders into different directions than bringing them together. And I'll show some examples later. We also, what seemed to come through these conversations we had was that stakeholder complexity shifts attention away from the user centricity and from the responsible innovation. So stakeholders seem to want to their relationships, the way they interact in the ecosystem, is so consuming that the user centricity issue and the responsible innovation seem to kind of being crowded out. And then, of course, another thing that we identified here is that these kinds of ineffective stakeholder collaboration slows down data sharing, which in itself creates another problem in moving forward with innovation. Now, I want to give you an example. I'll take an example from the first point, which is the lack of standards and definitions, which weakens collaboration. I'm going to refer to a paper that we did not do, but it was published recently, and it was entitled "A Trustworthy AI Reality Check: The Lack of Transparency of Artificial Intelligence Products in Healthcare." And I read it with a lot of interest because I thought, okay, we really need transparency in healthcare. So in these AI products, this is something we've been writing in our guidelines. This is something we need to be doing. So this paper looked at various products, at 14 products that certify their actually certified medical AI tools for radiology. And you can see on this graph what they saw in terms of transparency was that although most of these products, or all of these products, they were transparent about the intended use. There was slightly less transparency about development, a bit less about clinical validation, and really very little on ethics. So the highlighted term text here, it's my highlighting. It says that this paper identifies major transparency gaps, including missing documentation on training data, ethical considerations, limitations for deployment, consent, safety monitoring, GDPR compliance. Again, that's because it's in Europe, so we have to comply with GDPR here. It's our data protection regulation. And also concluding that public documentation of authorized medical AI products in Europe lacks sufficient public transparency. So basically, this paper tells us that we should be expecting a certain standard of transparency that these products did not meet. And this left me wondering, because these are products that I suppose, since they are tools, AI tools for radiology, I would say they're the tools that you find in hospitals. When I walk into a hospital, I have not looked as a layperson, as a patient, information about these kinds of types that are listed here when it goes to the MRI machine that's going to be used or the X-ray machine that is going to be used. So what I felt to me here is that we're setting first a different kind of standard, and second, we are maybe confusing, or we're not in agreement when even talk about transparency that I guess we all agree that we need, to whom and by whom and at what level. So this paper argues that we don't have public transparency, but maybe, and I haven't done the double checking here, but maybe all these pieces of information that are here have been submitted to the authorities that are certifying those, or to the hospitals that are going to pick up the tools if they want to do that. Which begs the question of standards and agreement when it comes to really the practical translation of what we want. If transparency is important because it serves us as a principle, it has an articulation in practice. But then in practice, we have to agree about what exactly we're looking for. And perhaps the public transparency, even if we're missing the information about GDPR or the training data, if that transparency was made to the market authorization, to the authorities that certify those tools, to the hospitals, to the physicians, etc., probably it should suffice. So I'm using this paper as an example of how we are still not clear in terms of standards and what actually asking for from those who develop those kinds of systems when we want to say that this product was correctly developed and it meets our criteria. And I think this can be very problematic because it does undermine this lack of clarity on the standards and the expectations at whatever level. I think it generally gets us going into circles about, again, more ethics and again, less specificity. So that's, I think, one example that I was happy to take back on the discussion, but it's quite worrisome in the translation pathway. The next set of issues that we identified was what we at least labeled as lack of ethics awareness amongst digital health innovators. Now, again, you can see some of the quotes here, but in general, we saw that some of the innovators or our group, our stakeholders, told us that they are not really getting into those issues because they don't know about them, or because even if they do know about those issues, they do not have the resources that are required to investigate and to meet the requirements. And of course, that we have again that the resources was the major actually issue that we had here. Now I'm going to go again. This could vary from country to country because maybe in different places these types of awareness is higher than in others. But what I wanted to do again here is to give you an example of going from theory to practice. And I wanted to move to the tools that are available or are becoming available in order to help people with their awareness, but actually also with ensuring, or at least trying to ensure, that their products meet ethical requirements. This what you see here in this slide is a screenshot, or partly a screenshot, from the OECD's AI Policy Observatory that has created a catalog of tools and metrics for trustworthy AI. And now you see why I say I use things interchangeably, because I guess the examples I use have different terminology. But I think they're all aiming at the same thing. We have to have AI that meets ethical standards. It reduces the risks and harms and maximizes the benefit. So again, in today's, I think as at least of yesterday, we had listed there 703 tools and metrics for trustworthy AI. And these are made by different academic stakeholder groups, and they are different types of tools. Some of them are awareness building, some are checklists, some are frameworks, some guidelines. There are lots of different things available there, which I think they do two things. One, the fact that you should know that there are all like 700 tools already out there. It means that the word is out that you need to do something about the ethical issues. So I guess the point about awareness is maybe more difficult to justify in general, but probably easy to justify specifically. So in the sense that, yeah, I know I should meet ethical requirements, but what does this really mean for me as a startup, for example, that I'm in this space? Probably we do have less awareness on that specificity level, but perhaps not so much on the general thing that, yeah, let's be ethical. What's interesting, what has been interesting to observe here, again, is some work that we haven't published yet, but we're doing in looking at all these kinds of tools and see if they are available. Again, why are we seeing the stakeholders group arguing that they don't have what it takes to help them with their ethics, meeting their ethical requirements? This is unpublished work, but what we're seeing already there is that some of these tools suffer, or most of these tools suffer from a number of problems. And the reason they are not getting adopted is because their usability is not there, is because there are organizational barriers. Now, of course, if you're in a little startup, maybe you don't have a big organization to set you a barrier, but I think that applies more to bigger organizations where, legacy systems might cause issues. But also the fact that we have an absence, at least we observed an absence of evaluation mechanisms and metrics for successful implementation. What does it mean to use these tools? And then, of course, in your system, even if it's not that you're taking some sort of theoretical system and you want to translate it, but you just take one of these auditing tools, what does it mean? The biggest thing we observed is that, especially in this very large pool of all kinds of tools that are out there, is that we don't have some form of agreement about which tool is good and why. we're just, if you have an idea about what it means to translate transparency or fairness or whatever in an AI-enabled system, you can claim you have a tool, but we do not have a proper verification system or an assessment system to tell us which tools are for what and why. Now, that is quite problematic. I think, again, although we do want more awareness and more practical use, I think this kind of, at this stage, very chaotic, I would say, type of proliferation of alleged tools, it's not serving our kind of purposes. But on the other hand, I don't want to say that these tools are bad. Maybe they're fantastic. It's just that we don't have a way to assess them. We're just having them out there making certain claims. And that's even more interesting as we're moving on in Europe, in particular with the AI Act, which does call for audits and for use of tools for certain assessments. Now, there again, we don't know what kind of tools are these that should be used. Maybe any tool will suffice, or maybe only certain tools. So we still, I think that's something that I would say causes some of the trouble. Now, I'm moving on to the last cluster of what we've seen in our study as issues with adoption or right translation, and that is the lack of adequate regulation. Again, this work is from Switzerland, so maybe not widely applicable. The issues here that were raised that the regulators seem to have frameworks and concepts in mind that it's just the regulators is whatever they've been doing before, for example, with medical devices, and they haven't sufficiently adapted yet to meet those needs. That's true in Switzerland. We also have some regulatory uncertainty that creates trouble for innovators. And also that uncertainty maybe drives out those big innovators that are compliance focused because they don't want to take certain risks. We did have a CEO from a startup, and quote is here, saying that we still do not know what class of medical device we should choose. Other startups recommend avoiding regulatory heavy pathways as much as possible. So you try to go with the pathways that seem to be less demanding and consuming than others. The regulatory question is interesting, and I think I'm not sure about what's the situation in Israel, but we do know that the FDA is trying to make certain changes and adjustments. I think in Switzerland we're also thinking about that, Europe and everywhere, but things are not fixed yet. It's kind of like the phase where we do have to we're working towards something. But I just wanted to take a moment and think also about another issue that it's interesting for the efficiency and fitness of our systems. And that's not law here, but I've been thinking, and with my group, we've been thinking quite a bit about the ethics review of medical AI or AI in general, but also medical AI types of research in particular. And when you think about our oversight systems, law is different, but it is, at least in our country, within our regulatory requirements, is to have oversight systems for research. When we look at the ethics review of that kind of research, we still, and again, in research we did here, but also in other work that we've consulted with other colleagues abroad, we found that IRBs or institutional review boards or ethics review committees, whatever you want to call them in different countries, do not seem to be equipped to oversee this type of research. And there are many reasons for that, ranging from the actual legal mandates of these committees to much more practical issues like the composition of these types of committees and their ability to process the type of proposals that are put to them. But I think this is also something that tells us that when we're looking for a regulatory clarity and regulatory fitness, we should think very carefully about our oversight systems at the level of research. You could say, well, the IRBs are things we have in research ethics committees, are things that we have in academic research centers, and maybe a startup doesn't have that. But I think, thinking about wherever the innovation happens, wherever research of this type happens, I think I'm using the example of the oversight mechanism as really as an example of fitness of our systems to help us translate the ethical requirement, the ethical principle into something actionable and practical. Now, when we moved on from our research on obstacles to say, okay, stakeholders, maybe tell us what we should be doing in order to move forward. And this is work that is forthcoming in Nature Digital Medicine. We again had sort of three clusters of response of solutions, let's say, that correspond to the three clusters of problems that we identified. So if the first cluster of problems was the ineffective stakeholder collaboration, what seemed to be the response to that we have to support is this notion of inclusive co-creation, where it requires that stakeholders are involved throughout all major phases of the innovation process. And here, it was very interesting, but all these, or at least in our work, the stakeholders were here they did agree on this type of involvement, including regulators, depending on what category, of course, of innovation we're talking about, including patients, including citizens as active co-creators. Again, now co-creation is not something brand new. At least, again, those of us in this area of work, we know about the importance of engaging patients in various types of research already, not just innovation. We also know that we have not done incredibly well. We've done, sometimes we are a little better than we used to be, but we can't say with certainty that we did involve patients and citizens in incredible ways here in what we do. But still, I think it's important in this case to highlight that this was something that's been, again, put forward as the potential solution. Again, and this was actually proposed as a way to address patient centricity, something that we do want to have in AI-enabled innovation, and it is a requirement, an ethical requirement, something that would increase trust and something that will probably serve us in terms of equity, raising questions of equity and privacy early on in the process of innovation, and not at the end when we have done things. This kind of very clear message about how we need to co-create and how we should finally take that type of co-creation seriously was also what a group of us put forward together with the RAISE consortium in papers that were published. The same paper was published recently at Nature Medicine and at in New England Journal of Medicine AI. And if you see here, when we looked at what needs to be done, in that box, the point B was, this paper is written more as a kind of like, not as a scientific paper per se, but rather as an opinion of the group that, and a consensus statement of the group that was together at that meeting. So point B is about bringing patients, advocates, and clinicians into the process of designing technology at every stage, particularly in setting its guardrails and limits on its use, both to ensure that it suits their needs and to build trust. And that makes me think that group was very international, very US heavy, and we did our research in Switzerland. It seems to me that what we have in common, this group and our stakeholders, is that we do identify this solution as actually the one that we need to really implement, that co-creation, that bringing people and those stakeholders together would be the way forward in order to meet that type of ethical requirement. So it's one to take seriously. Another one that we also identified in our research is what we call value-driven innovation, the sort of hardwiring of ethical requirements into innovation process and also in business models. And I think something that it's going to matter a lot is what the business model of these technologies are going to be, enable innovators to understand those implications, provide innovators with the practical innovation tools to deliver this responsible innovation, and of course, define new business models that are also meant to create benefit. Not everybody's going to pick those types of business models, but there are ways to think more creatively about those. And I want to highlight again from our work with the RAISE consortium, the quote from David Cutler, who was there: "Do not find the monetary incentives, you will lose." So the idea being we should use more efficiently and creatively the business models in order to enable that translation to more ethical innovation. And the last thing that came through our research was this concept of agile regulation, which describes regulators' capacity to anticipate, to guide, and respond in those fast emerging and high impact innovations. Agile regulation, again, is not an absolutely new thought. It has been discussed earlier. I don't think we ever got to do it, but it seems that this area of work of technology that we're in is very well suited for this concept of agility, which includes the idea of having these early exchanges between regulators and innovators. This very famous sandboxing, which is severely underused, which allows the regulators and innovators to explore innovation in safe environments. And I think hopefully also the AI Act in Europe will support these concepts of sandboxing. And of course, the principle-based regulation that enables regulators and innovators to some extent to self-regulate. So have a mix between the regulatory systems that are written, the hard law approaches and the soft law approaches. And I want to close this with something that came to my attention recently. The American Medical Association did a survey on the future of health, the emerging landscape of augmented intelligence in healthcare. And here again, the choice of word is interesting. It's not artificial intelligence. The AI is augmented intelligence. And looking at what are the current uses across specialties of artificial intelligence. And I hope you can see the numbers there on your screens, but really, if you look at those, the numbers are pretty low. If you compare those numbers with the hype and the discussion and all that we're talking about, to me at least, it seemed not extraordinary. So, or not really very promising at the moment. And I wondered whether part of the reason is partly are we afraid of using those technologies? Aren't they not available? Aren't they not vetted? Aren't they not the right kinds of technologies? This is also a biggest area if you look at the biggest area of opportunity for AI to address, again, you will see where it is, and you'd think like, wow, where is the clinic here? It's actually address administrative burdens through automation. That's most of where our hopes are. And you could say, well, these are well-placed hopes. That's what we should be doing in healthcare and leave the other stuff out. But I'm putting those two slides to you to say that I think, and it's a speculation, but I think part of kind of the that picture is, and maybe in Israel you see things very differently, but I think partly the question is, the issue is that we're not very sure about those technologies in terms of safety and effectiveness. And maybe we have some serious concerns in the conservative field of healthcare and medicine in particular about ethics and liability. And so this maybe creates that sort of scenario where we don't see things happening in the way they're described in other types of literature and other industries. So I want to close by saying that if we're thinking about how we were going to translate our ethical theory about AI, medical AI, I don't think we have a magic wand. I don't think we can just like magically think that this is going to happen. And I don't think we should be thinking that because we got our guidelines, the world is going to be fine. We need to translate those. I feel that we are at what maybe we could call institutional turn in AI ethics, which means that institutions have to take over in the sense of either regulatory clarity, but also enforcing certain translational pathways for our ethical requirements. I think, again, as at least shown in our research, that we do need to collaborate in order to get this thing done. We need a collaboration between the regulators, technologists, clinicians, patients, and investors. It doesn't look like it can be done if only one party is pushing forward. And I think we need more practice. That's one of the reasons I like those sandboxes. We need to practice translation of ethical theory into practice in safe environments. And I will close with that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Effy, for your very eye-opening and comprehensive delivery. And I think you may stop. And so if people are able to open their cameras, I think it'll be a wonderful opportunity to open this for discussion. We have experts from different fields, different stakeholders, really in the spirit of your talk. And I will not push my thoughts and just open up for questions with a raise of hand, questions or anything you would like to offer to open this discussion. We'd be happy to hear. So the floor is yours, participants.
I'm also very happy to hear from you how that kind of issue of translation of ethics from theory to practice is happening in Israel or in other countries where you are logging in from. I'm actually very interested in hearing how others see that, not just in response to what I've been saying, but also your own views on that. And we're keen to learn.
So please open your cameras, and whomever would like to begin, I'll just say for now, this usually opens the appetite when I say something. You talked a lot about limiting the scope of the implementation or the meaning of what you're saying, limiting it to where you looked at the data and the people that you interviewed. And I can just offer an initial thought. We seem to be living in a world that has more in common than we initially thought in many things. And so I think a lot of the things you said resonated to many of the listeners from different countries. With all the differences, I think even, let's say, places that are considered innovative and easy to adopt change may have elements that are more conforming with old habits, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something to think about. Carmen, please maybe introduce yourself, and please.
Hi, my name is Carmen Larson. I'm the founder of Bioethics with an X, BIOETHX. We've been working for about 20 years on trying to promote standards for medical ethics through forums of discussion and digital tools to help do that. I found your presentation fascinating. It's really great. You covered so much ground. In terms of, I was interested in terms of promoting better transparency, and you were saying collaboration can happen only when you have agreed upon standards and data sharing protocols. And you also mentioned that there were more than 700 tools out there to help with AI in medical research. When we've looked at looking at ethics committees for reviews on medical research, what we found is that there isn't a standard for how you code these things. How do you code the situation? And so we've worked with University of Southern Illinois and Kelly Armstrong also, who's now at Inova. She came up with a really great coding schema, but it's really hard to get other people to agree or even discuss or come up with a standard way of digitizing or coding even what the situation is. Do you have some suggestions on how we can get people to agree on having a common standard? I mean, I think what you're doing to talk about the fact that we do need standards is excellent, but how do we move forward with that?
Thank you, Carmen. That's really a great question, and I don't have a very good answer to your question, and sometimes I'm also frustrated by being in the position of keep identifying a problem and then not offering the solution for that problem, which is the thing to be doing. I think we have, so I agree with all you said. My worry with AI is that we're piling up more requirements without clarifying what exactly they mean. So on top of what we have, our own issues we had already with ethics review and what does it mean to be this or the other, now we have, in this particular case, more requirements. So for example, the requirement of transparency. And I feel that maybe when it comes to, for example, breaking it down to what kind of transparency do we want to have, for whom and where, maybe this is where institutions have to come in and say, okay, that's exactly what we're looking for. In your product, you should have disclose information about this and this and that, right? And right now, I don't think we do. I think if ethics review committees for the research purposes, if, for example, our market authorization organizations at that level start clarifying the requirements and making them as clear and undisputed as possible, that might be a move forward. I think we spend more time in kind of recycling what transparency ought to be, why it is good, why it supports trust, and all of these things, but kind of shy away from moving on to this very desired next step, which is either ethics review committees globally for one part of thing, FDA, EMA, or whoever else, our third-party certification systems in Europe are having much more clarity about those requirements. And again, even in that case, I don't think we cover the entire spectrum. They can talk about transparency. They can talk about whether consent was given or whatever. This could be just a tick box thing, which is not maybe sufficient, but I think we'll start getting a little bit closer to some common language if at these institutional levels we get this specificity. But it's not a great answer. It's more of like kind of a half hope, half partly informed somewhat from discussions I've been having, but also partly also some hopeful kind of speculation, I guess.
I offer a thought. So we're not in the business of great answers here. I think we're in this business of deliberating tough questions and thinking together about how we as society, as professionals, as users, or as any stakeholder that we are, and as a society, looking forward to making things a bit clearer, a bit better. I think that's maybe more similar to what we can aspire for. And I was thinking about the Tower of Babylonia. I don't know how you say that in English, but yeah. We have this interdisciplinary seminar that we do every year for several years in the Faculty of Medicine, where we have jurists and healthcare providers, psychologists, other from the field of mental health, and we discuss forensic issues of compulsory hospitalization. And we begin with a lecture that is called the Tower of Babylonia, to basically talk about the different languages where people from different disciplines basically bring with them what it is that they're used to doing and thinking through certain lenses. And as you've said, and as many are saying, we are now doing something that does require this interdisciplinary, intergroup kind of professional, whatever you want to call it, meetings. There's no, there's a reason why we're doing these international meetings, and there's a reason we're doing it in English, and that we're pursuing that together. And so I'm thinking the language you talked about is really important. And the thing is, just like ChatGPT could say wonderful things that make no sense or make some sense or make a relatively close sense, but nothing that is usable, people can do just the same. So in a way, we don't need to blame the machine for not making sense. We could do it as well as the machine, and maybe even better, not making sense or saying things that are not useful. And if I look at the presentation that you provided us with, which is amazing, I was thinking that several of the statements there are wonderful, but anybody could read into them whatever they want or whatever they feel is correct. So again, we're left with principles sometimes that are a challenge to kind of translate. And then use cases are one way of helping out, but then you could have so many examples and so many use cases. So it becomes, again, so much to handle. So how do you handle that? So that's just one thought. And then just one thing you talked about, like there's a paper called Dignity is a Useless Concept, right? It's a very famous paper. And it's not because, it's not like dignity is not important. Everybody agrees it's important, but how does it help me that I use this wonderful word that everybody agrees upon? It's just like saying, do good and avoid doing bad. That's wonderful, but is it really getting me any closer to knowing how I should act? So I think in this regard, it really does relate to a lot of what you said. I'm not going to say more just because there's so many other people here that I'm sure have things to ask or to offer. Some of that I can say, we are doing a special theme issue in the Journal of Medical Internet Research, Mental Health. Amir and I are guest editors, and some of the authors are here. And some of the papers try to, again, from a smaller perspective of mental health, think about the questions that you've asked, some of them offering maybe additional layers. In a way, we're in a very unique time where we're rethinking some of the concepts, not to remove everything and start over, but maybe to focus and see how we can implement the ethics and the laws we already have in a way that is adaptable to a changing technology and reality. I think that's the story. So without saying names, who's up to say their thoughts? So I'm thinking about, you asked about Israel, so that's why I'm thinking we have several lawyers here, and you wondered whether we see things differently here. So I'm asking the lawyers here if they have any input on that specific question. Does anybody know about the Israeli AI Act?
Are you having an act? Is there an act under preparation?
That's the kind of question that puts people into a position of being scared that they've missed something, right? So while sometimes our parliament is quick to enact, in this specific matter, there are a lot of discussions, there are a lot of papers, but they're choosing a softer approach, not hurrying up to enact laws, but we still need to consider what it is that we need to do. So you mentioned a lot of things that are being considered over the past years. One of them relates to, so what kind of process do we need to have to authorize research that relates to, AI, generative AI, in medicine, right? So we have the Helsinki committees, as we call them, or we have the ethics committees at the university or in hospitals. Does the Ministry of Health need to consider in what way are the Helsinki rules or principles should be applied when you consider the risk and benefit of any kind of AI-related research? In a way, they still haven't written any kind of guidelines, but they're working on that, right? They're consulting with people thinking about how they should do it, looking at what's done in the world. So in a way, we don't want to invent the wheel, so to speak, right? But then bringing from my own experience at the ethics committee of our university, for instance. So yeah, some of the research is AI related, and then the question is, so what do we know as members of the ethics committee about AI technology and what it entails? And what should be the requirements for us to consider when we approve or ask questions or ask to change portions of the informed consent form or whatever? How do we acknowledge questions of privacy? Should we so all these questions? There's some debate about that. Really, no guidelines. And then the question is, so do we have a seminar of the members of the committee? Do we get all the ethics committee members in Israel to sit together and think about it? I don't know. I'm throwing it out there. I have a fear that people will say, that's a great idea. Why don't you organize that, right? But maybe we should.
You don't want to pick up more tasks.
No, but we'll ask the AI to provide us with a seminar about AI ethics. That would be an ethical idea, right?
That would be great. Yeah. No, but I mean, to your point, I think we had the same thing when we looked at the ethics review committees in Switzerland. It was clear, two things became clear. One is they don't have, these committees were composed for other things, right? To review clinical trials, to do this kind of work. So they're very good at those things, but then you throw in some AI stuff and they have to call somebody to ask them, hey, what is this type of technology? Now, that's the one issue. The second issue is, as per the mandates of our committees are very much focused on protecting individual participants. And most of the time, the individual participants in the AI type of research, they're not going to be harmed. What is going to be a problem is further down the line. If this,
that's right. So it's an initial phase.
You're not intervening in some sort of sense of an investigational drug or something like that, right? And you would have some sort of backup if the diagnostics are in the one way or the other. But I think and I see it as a reviewer in my own university. I mean, if we're doing emotional recognition research, no, the participant is not going to be harmed. He's going to be smiling, and you measure certain things. What might potentially harmful is further down the line, right? What this is about. Why should you recognize my emotional state of being by the distance between my eyebrows and the, whatever other metric you're going to use because of the patterns that you've used? So I think when it comes to oversight, we have these two issues: competence, and the second is mandate, basically. So and here there is, as you said, quite a lot of conversation about how we're going to do this. Are we going to have to change? But I also I have not seen something very universally adopted, clear system of approach of how we're going to do this kind of review, as we have seen with other things, like with how consent should look like about certain things. So the oversight question is clearly still pending. And the other thing you do not want to say is, let's say, okay, we'll have yet another review committee which reviews the AI related research, because the researchers are going to kill you if you add another layer of review on top of what they have to review anyway. And in some places you have a data access committee, then you have the ethics review committee, and now you put another committee that does something else. I think that will be a huge problem.
I think I heard somebody saying that a camel is a horse designed by a committee or something like that. So here's my take on some of the things that you said. So you talked about the wording that we use. There's a reason why I mentioned Babylonia. So in a way, some say trustworthy AI. So is it about trust or someone or something that you can rely on? So that's one element, right? It brings a whole load of meanings to it. And other talk about responsible AI. So that, to me, alludes to responsibility, maybe liability, not just responsibility in the sense that I'm a responsible person, that whatever. And some very few talk actually about ethical AI. To be honest, that's us, the bioethicists, that think it's an important notion to talk about. And so maybe there's a reason why there are different wordings to it, because different people come with different scopes or agendas because they're doing different things. So that's one element. So I don't think it's exactly the same. And since we're talking about different aspects of responsibility, trustworthiness, and so on, then obviously it's hard to decide about the oversight mechanism before we begin by defining what it is that we want. So in a way, like we have to start with what it is. Like we call our initiative the Samueli Initiative for Responsible AI in Medicine, potentially just because that's the shortest word. It's responsible is shorter than trustworthy, right? And maybe we want to have some appeal to the industry and so on. And but does it encapsulate the whole story? I'm not sure. I think not, right? So in our editorial, which is still been written, that's where we want to start. So we talk. There's a reason there's so many documents, because well, everybody wants to bring in their input, but maybe you're correct about maybe we should kind of look at everything that's there already and see if we can kind of encapsulate that in a very simple, short, understandable, easily agreed upon statement or principles or whatever. And I don't think we're ever going to have a complete agreement about what it is that we want, but at least to have some guidelines, some standards that we agree on. And you use the word standards, right? And then so a lot of times standards relate to regulation. It's like a boring thing that you need to go through, some loopholes you need to jump through before they allow you to go to the real thing and I don't know, get your business running. So in our discussions with different innovators and different like we've had one today, well, we're meeting a lot of stakeholders that have great ideas, the things they're starting, or they want to come to the next level of maybe making it commercial and so on. And the question of ethics, it's interesting for them. We talk about it, but in a way, you need to sell it. You need to sell ethics. You need to sell it as a selling point. For instance, you can use the AI Act as an example, saying, look, I said that today, right? So once it's in, they're going to require to see how you started planning your product and to see that you've been acting according to the responsible approach from beginning, from design to the collecting and choosing of the data that you use for training and so on. So if you don't think about it right now, you may be in a big problem in a year or 2 years from now when the act is in place, and then you would have a problem with having your product approved or whatever. So that's maybe one way, the carrot and the stick, saying that currently for you now ethics is a stick, but it could also be a carrot. And I think that relates to, you talked about being practical, and then you provided with a lot of important things that for many would be seen as hampering their willingness to run forward and just get things done, right? So all those ethical and legal requirements. So what do you want me to do about that? So transparency, what do you like, right? So if we want to operationalize all of those things, I would assume that that's the language that let's say experts in engineering speak more, right? So how do we operationalize it? How do we translate that into something we can code, or we can have SOPs and so on? I don't really have a point in what I'm saying. I'm basically sharing with you my thoughts.
Yeah, no. I mean, and others should chime in here, but I think what's happening is also we see also maybe another distinctions. You mentioned first the AI Act. I think the AI Act is asking for all these kinds of things, like tools, basically. They ask for your data governance plan, on which you use to train your model. They're asking for audits. They're asking for impact assessment. They're asking for what we assume are the tools with which you prove you are good, right? So I guess that's the idea. And
Right.
and what I was trying to say is that if that's a legal requirement, like everybody has to do it. So you cannot not provide your data governance. You cannot not have your audit. It's at the moment we don't know what these tools are. If you give me a tool and tell me, please use this tool. If you use this tool, your product will be fine. I'll say, okay, no problem. I'm going to use this tool. But at the moment, we do not have even agreement about this tool. Just use a tool, whatever that tool is. Whatever that tool is not going to do the work that we want to be done. So I think we have, and maybe it's normal to be in that confused state at this time because we haven't yet, we're not mature enough in the translation. So I'm not saying that, that's catastrophic. Maybe it's just part of the natural process. If you think in bioethics, we did go from the principles to actual operationalization phases, right? Where we did formulate the ethics review committees. We did have the templates for the concept. But it took us time. It was a much slower process. Now we want check from, every month we want to kind of solve this problem. And it's just not happening at the pace we would like to do it. But I think we have one issue with this lack of clarity almost, which translates then into this variety of tools and at the same time, the legal requirements and all of that. And I want to say one more thing about the language we use. In Europe, the reason we talk about trustworthy AI is because this expert group that was put together in the earlier days decided to said that, we're philosophers and social scientists and all the wonderful people that come from our kind of crowds that use words, beautiful words and important words in certain ways. So trustworthy came up in this context, which is phenomenal. But then my question is, how can you take that trustworthy and put it in law and make law out of that and ask for the law to do this for you? I think it was maybe rushed or maybe problematic or not challenged enough. Also because let's go to another discussion of whether trustworthiness is something we should attribute to technology or to science or anything that is inanimate and not maybe keep it for the interrelational kind of sphere where I think you're to be trusted or you're not to be trusted, but I do think that my computer is a reliable tool that does whatever I tell it every time I tell it to do it. But I don't trust it in a sense of having, a leap of faith that I would have with a human. So I think the word, of course, you could say, well, this is too philosophical and people understand this in a simpler way. But I'm worried a little bit about that when we use this type of terminology, I think I'm not sure that kind of thing, if you're not writing an academic paper, which is wonderful, and we want action, real action on the ground, whether that is useful. And whether for real action on the ground, we want a different vocabulary, the one that can be acted upon. So I have my thoughts about whether, I also understand that sometimes we need aspirational talk, aspirational documents. So we want to, create this beautiful world. But when it comes to standards and legal requirements and all these kinds of things we want to translate things to, I think the language should be different. And I think at that point, language has to be quite concrete and specific and appropriate for action.
Yeah, I'm really happy you mentioned language. Amir, I'm sorry, you want to say something, please?
Yeah, first, thank you very much. Really interesting. And I'm coming from the disability field, and I'm trying to think about, like, for example, when we're talking about accessibility for people with disabilities. So it started with all sort of like regulations and rules, etc. But then also our organization understood the business case of accessibility. That is to say, once you are an accessible business, and more people will come to you because there are a lot of people with disabilities, their family members, etc. And I think that in the same way, probably not now, because again, the AI field is really like growing and dynamic and everything. And but once we're gonna be able to define the specific regulations for AI ethics in healthcare. I think that those startups, organizations, whatever, would need to understand that that's not only like you must do that, it's also going to be beneficial because your product or your service is going to be better if it's ethical. You know what I'm saying? It's like not just like you must do that, it's also you're going to have like other benefits in that sense.
I think that's also a great point, that somehow to understand meeting those ethical standards as having value for your product. So it is added value for whatever you're putting out on the market, not just like a legal requirement you have to tick off this box. And then when I'm trying to think, okay, how can we do that? I still go back to these more systemic kind of responses, like, when we train our people here at our universities, kind of and put these ideas in their head from the beginning, before they're down there begging an investor to give them, funding for their startup, which is kind of further down the line, but rather when from as much as possible from the beginning, train their minds in that sort of way. You don't solve this, you don't solve every problem with having people trained in those things, but I think you do create a culture where maybe those things matter a little more. In one of our, I have to tell you this, in one of our follow-up events for this study, we did bring some other stakeholders to discuss our findings. Amongst them, some people from venture capital type of firms. And at the end, one of those people, very honest actually, stood up and said, you know what, I don't know what you guys are talking about, but if there is no clear profit, I don't know, why should I do this? And it was very blatant. It was like no frills and no sugarcoating, which I found, because we were, of course, all of us agreeing how wonderful it would be to do ethical innovation and how we should meet all these criteria and how, we should train people to do this and that. And when it came to, and he was honest enough not to be silent, which he had the right to, but rather to stand up and say that there is one thing that matters when you are thinking about investment, and that's the thing. And so it was, and if it's going to cost you money to be trust to have all that, but you don't see the clear profit that you're going to make out of that investment, you're not going to invest in this kind of thing. So it was very interesting. It goes back to the point that you raised about, well, if that becomes part of the value of the product, if more people will get the product because it has met those requirements, if your brand is going to be a lot better because you are not kind of ruining people's lives in one way or another, maybe that leads to that kind of investment thinking. But it's clear that all these stakeholders matter. We can talk as much as we want about all this stuff. If the investors are not going to play along, I think we're not going to get there. So it does really matter to have to create that, and that's why I don't think it's going to be done with a tool. I think it has to be done with trying it from multiple approaches, with training, with different with regulation, with discussion, with lots of different pieces that hopefully create that shift in our thinking about how technology, at least in the area of medicine and healthcare, where I think there are different kinds of sensitivities, we might have a chance.
Yeah. So Carmen just wrote that there's no financial incentive even for academic institutions to focus on responsible or ethics in AI. So I'm just saying this may be the time to thank the Samueli Foundation for helping us set up this initiative for responsible AI in medicine. And I think while they're helping out a lot of basic research in science and cancer and so on, which is obviously very important, the fact that they're also thinking about ethics in those innovations as well, I believe is really important. And we all know that ethics is maybe important, but it doesn't get as much financial attention for different reasons. I may just add, I see Professor Ganot opened his microphone. He may want to say something. So I'm just saying, just want to say that I might connect to what you said. So one way of doing incentives is to use the nudging concept. So potentially you don't need to penalize people. Rather, you may want to nudge them towards doing the right thing by allowing them some tax reductions or easy access to be adopted by the healthcare system. So if you got a fast track just because you did things ethically, or a shorter period of follow-up, or whatever, like I don't want to throw ideas I haven't thought through, because maybe follow-up needs to be done anyway, but maybe longer gaps between each follow-up, whatever. These things, they are costly, and if you can save money and at the same time get a potential better outcome, then you should do it for these reasons as well, and because it's the right thing. So I just wanted to add this concept. Israel, please.
Yeah, so regarding that response to the VC guy who sees everything through money. So really, so FDA also something that he will never put a dime in unless FDA is, you get an FDA approval so you can sell in this market. So it's very easy to add an addendum of AI to FDA regulations, and then he will, of course, put a lot of money on that. So that's clear. The second thing regarding AI, and so lately it was found out that there's a lot of instruments that are totally inaccurate because they don't differentiate between black skin and lighter skin. So now FDA, oh, what's going on? How could we approve these instruments without really looking at the results? That was so different. So now they are adding these issues because it all depends on, on the how many you are using in order to make your algorithm accurate. What type of people you're doing, each gender, there is a lot of issues, and there is a background. So if it is part of the whole scheme, then they will invest. And no company will ever be able to sell any instrument if this doesn't work. It's not something that is, very general academic. It's real practice. And the same with the decision making, the last thing, decision making, using different types of software to make, decision about a certain disease of somebody and how to take care of him.
Yeah. And that's, I agree with you. It's just sort of like, the multiple requirements, right? It's not just one actor that could do that. But of course, if regulators come in with these requirements, this will kind of put pressure also on the investors because they want the product to be approved. Otherwise, what's the point of money there anyway in the first place? And we've seen that these kinds of incentives work. You remember with incentives for including pediatric clinical trials when we didn't do any clinical trials, but once it got interesting to get data from children, wow, there's much more going on. So these incentives work. We know this. So we just have to be creative about them, I think, at sort of multiple levels and layers. And the only thing that is creates anxiety, I think, for me, is that as things move a lot faster than they moved in the biomedical world previously, where we had a bit more time to kind of develop our processes, to operationalize, to have our failures, things scale way too fast and move way too fast. So it's a bit of an anxiety-inducing speed, I would say, that I don't know how we can address that, because you cannot tell people slow down. Nobody's slowing down when it comes to this, and I'm not even sure it's a good idea, because maybe there's something phenomenal that's going to come out of the speed, but we in the field where we need to think this through to develop ways and approaches, and I think there we're kind of like running like at a speed that we're not used to, I guess.
Yeah.
We're not trained for.
Technology goes very fast, so we in the ethics should go fast as well. Otherwise,
I agree.
Doing our
agree.
best. Anyone who hasn't shared thoughts with us would like to add something to the discussion? So we are nearing the end of the session. So if it's time to speak, or not forever, but until our next time, hold your peace. So we have 4 minutes. Carmen, if you have something short to add, please bring us home.
Yeah. So wouldn't you say that it's not just the AI that needs to be, we need to do something about the standards, but also an education piece of people who are going to be using the AI, the provider, because we've seen some cases where AI has been introduced in a medical hospital, albeit they didn't have regulations on how the AI was going to be. But then a doctor thought, because it's artificial intelligence, I should believe whatever it comes out. And they had a lot of really bad outcomes. So I like the idea of augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, because it conveys more the idea that you have to bring something to the table as well, whether it's your own education about it or learning how to take this with a grain of salt and saying, this is additional information I have, but not necessarily the right answer all the time.
Thank you, Carmen.
Very much in favor of augmented intelligence. I think precisely because I think it implies exactly what you said. It's not like, you're absolved from our responsibility because you have the artificial intelligence. It's just an augmentation of your own intelligence under these circumstances. Absolutely in favor of a proper education, so you can assess what you're getting as well.
Yeah. And Damila, bring us home, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Well delivered presentation, Prof. I really enjoyed it. Succinctly, I just wanted to add that it's really important that we have strategies in place, because we know that technology isn't stopping anytime. There will be innovation all the time. So we must have strategy in place to keep up with it. I think that is the only way we can really ensure that we're on top of it at every point in time. Like Prof said, she said, it's not going to stop for anybody. It's not going to do that. So we have to have strategies in place that will ensure that at every point in time, we are not left behind as policymakers, regulators, lawyers, lawmakers, and we can always deliver in terms of, we know where this is heading to, and we're already there. So as much as we are not, I think another challenge we have is the fact that coding, tech itself is not our specialization. So we also need to consider collaboration with these people so that we can both monitor and regulate them within their own space as well. Because as much as we can't stop them, we can guide them. So when they come on board, they understand the do's and don'ts. And that will help them as well to come with the right kind of innovation that will not have a negative impact in the society. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe to sum up, so Effy, Professor Vayena, you spoke about a lot of important matters. You touched upon how we're basically now at a time where policy is in progress. It's being created, so we need to think. I think that's one of the messages, and related to maybe value-driven innovation. But then you also talked about principles, so values and principles, and then you mentioned trustworthiness, which in my view is also related mostly to virtues, which is kind of strange when we talk about non-humans. And in a way, you alluded to that, or said straight that in a way, what we're doing is anthropomorphizing and talking about the machine as if it were a person, and that will become more and more so as its abilities, its linguistic abilities and multimodalities would be more and more similar, potentially better than some of us, and that is something for us to, I think, to think about as a society as well. And I think there's a reason why AMA chose to call it augmented intelligence, in a way saying we are talking about the human intelligence, we're augmenting it with these new intelligences, so to speak. I can maybe just add one element that I think we talked about. You talked about the institutional turn. It's now the time for institutions to kind of raise up to the challenge and maybe think about how they create their guidelines or their trainings. I know you've been doing amazing trainings. I've seen the programs, and I really think that what you're doing there is something we could learn from and potentially do similar things here in Israel and other places. And so making the information about the ethics of AI, not just about AI, more accessible. And maybe that really relates to what Carmen asked about as well, or suggested, and that relates to, in a way, as we do patient education, here it's more like, I wouldn't say personalized education, but I would say crowd education related to AI in health specifically, and its ethical implications and what it can and cannot do. These would, I think, not remove all the obstacles, but potentially limit some of the biases that were mentioned here, the epistemic bias, for instance, that may lead us to follow whatever it says or potentially not believe anything it says, and so on and so forth. And so I think these have to be somewhat tailored towards the level of knowledge and education of different persons in different places and so on. And it's up to us as well to think about how we do that. And so I think it's not just writing those amazing guidelines that are wonderful, but as you said, they need to be accessible. And just like we have accessibility for people with disabilities, for people with hearing issues, with listening issues, we make things more accessible for children. I think we need to, just the same way as we talked about health literacy and how you can make people more literate and make it more easy for them to understand. I think we should, that should be also something for us to work on as a global community. I think it's a project. Again, I'm offering so many projects. I'm not sure which one we'll start with, but I do believe this is important and could be easily replicated once it's done well in one language. It's much easier to make it available in others. So not because we have nothing more to discuss, but because I think sometimes it's good to have a framework and try to stick to it. I just want to say thank you, Effy. That was phenomenal. I think I really enjoyed the meeting. I think it was a great debate and discussion here. And we hope to keep maybe working together and collaborating.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. And of course, as I told you, I do appreciate the initiative you're in. I don't think there are so many around the world like yours. Things are, separate, not together. So it's a great initiative. I'm very happy to stay involved and to hear of your progress, and hopefully to visit you in person when things are better. So
thank you
yeah,
so much. And
thank
with our
you.
newly established way of saying thank you, I would say thank you, everyone, and see you on our next meeting. We'll send you information about the next meetings. Thank you, Emil, and thank you everyone else in the initiative and the faculty and the university. And see you in our next meeting. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.